Hello everybody. Yes, my name is Matt and I'm here to talk about TELEMIDI. So it's the power of co-creating live music over a wide area network. So I'll go into detail how this operates, but I will forewarn you, I'm coming at latency from a musician perspective. And I think there might be some things we can take from that. Without further ado, I'd just like to play a clip. This is from about 6 months ago. There's myself here in Perth and my collaborator Bernardo Varela, a Brazilian located in London, a trace route of about 25,000 kilometres. And we're playing music in real time. This was streamed live to Twitch. We have beats, bass, harmony and melody, the sort of 4 key ingredients of music. And we're sharing MIDI data between us over that network. And we're also using the MIDI data to trigger the visual element that you see. So I'll play this, go through the context, and then revisit with some more examples. Okay, so there's a lot to take on board what's happening there. I will reiterate that through the left speaker is the Perth audio and through the right speaker is the London audio. So we're all here for latency, and music is very sensitive to latency, in particular rhythm. So what we heard there were all of the drum beats and loops, all in sequence and in time with each other. Give that a jiggle. Okay, so what am I going to cover? I'll introduce myself and I'm going to talk about telematic music performance, which is this little niche idiom that it is. Our favourite word, latency, I want to talk about that in relationship to music. And then talk about MIDI, why I love MIDI. Does anyone else here love MIDI? There's got to be a few, right? Yeah, brilliant. Then I'm going to talk about latency accepting solutions specific to telematic music performance. Just quickly run through the architecture that I'm using and talk about software as a service that I'm looking to develop after my PhD, and then some more examples about the journey thus far. So who am I? I commenced classical piano training in 1983. In 1988, I heard and fell in love with the drums. Not long after, I became a professional musician, and I've done about 3,500 gigs at all echelons of the music industry. I even played at the Burswood Dome, which was around here back in the day. So I've had a lot of experience as a timekeeper in live music environments. Composition, in 1992, I was fortunate enough to be a part of the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra's Young Composers program. I had a pencil, a piece of paper and a piano, and it took about 1.5 years to write a 6-minute piece, and another 1.5 years before I heard that being played by the orchestra. So the latency there was about 3 years. So it was a very 20th century experience. As a rock star, I have had chart success as well, but I've ridden the digital revolution that's hit music and hit everywhere at the same time. As a researcher, in 2017, I had the burning question, what if we send MIDI over the internet? How does that operate? Is it feasible? And indeed it is. And during the recent social isolation episodes, it became apparent that now is a good time to lift this up into a PhD. Okay, so what is telematic music performance? We have network music performance, which is more or less just musicians interacting over a computer connection, mostly done in a local area network. USB cables, Wi-Fi, Ableton Link provides some interoperability there as well. Initially, people started exploring over the internet, but that was deemed telematic music performance, predominantly over a wide area network. And of course, our best friend latency is this primary monolithic obstruction that interferes with music. TELEMIDI sits within that umbrella, so it's exclusively over a wide area network, but we're only sharing MIDI data between collaborators. And this really reduces the exposure to latency in a big way, and I'll run through that. So telematics from a musician's perspective, human-to-human engagement and information exchange via telecommunications. Pretty straightforward. The big thing is telepresence, so the ability to be in a space other than where your body resides. So if you think about two musicians, like two acoustic guitarists here, in that acoustic space, all of the nuance, the subtlety of timing, of tone, that there's a lot of information being exchanged. If we put that into a video conference screen with all of the wonderments that come through with conference calls, etc., that telepresence is skewed. So it's a big goal within this pursuit. The Zoom culture, and it was in 2020, I began to realise that the amount of people on the planet were now forced to engage with telematic communications. And with that social change comes a cultural change, the ability to accept interference, and learning how to problem solve, etc., etc. So once I saw that going on, that's why I lifted this up into a PhD. So telematic music represents teleconnected ontologies, imagination and collaboration, wherein meaning emerges from interaction between people rather than just the data being sent. So what I played before, it's just tiny little packets of MIDI data, but what we're able to generate is a wholly entertaining artistic venture, which brings into it all sorts of cultural and social elements as well. I do need to highlight digital audio workstations. They are now the predominant tool used to create modern music. So if you go to any territory and look at their top 10, 150, 160 of them, you'll be hard pressed to find a piece of music that wasn't created on a DAW. So it's a profound new tool, a 21st century tool for music creation. And within that paradigm, we have loop music, this loop culture. It all began with late 70s, early 80s, DJs, mixing, etc. Hip hop came in and brought with it digital samplers. If you look at genres such as EDM, house, techno, all that comes with it, it's all built around loops and repetition. Postmodernism, minimalism, these sorts of elements. Copy-paste culture, I call it. Okay, our best friend. Okay, so we all know latency is explicit and it's a persistent characteristic of WAN telematic music performance. It manifests across every stage. We're all trying to shave those milliseconds. But compounding the issue, of course, is jitter. This unstable music, for you to tap your foot, your brain needs to know where that next beat is. If we start messing with that, things fall apart really, really quickly. The human reaction, the cognitive processing of the musical patterns and sounds that we're hearing, and the physiological time to respond to that, that plays into it as well. We get tempo divergence, which I'll explain, but ultimately it disrupts the traditional human-to-human music cooperation. So to operate in the space, you need to be agile and responsive to the latency. We have what is called an ensemble performance threshold, and it sits at about 25 to 30 milliseconds. If you had two people here blindfolded trying to clap in time, once you get to about 8 or 9 meters, every 30 centimeters is a millisecond. Once you get to that time, the speed of sound means it will slowly get to the other person. And tempo divergence means we slow down in tempo. So that's the impact that latency has on music. Compare that to vocals, linguistic conversation. The latency budget, I call it, sits at about 150 milliseconds. So the musical latency budget is 1/5 of that of speech. And you just think of people talking over at the top of each other in a conference call. We can see how much that can be interrupted. MIDI, it's an anomaly. It's a strange platform, released in 1983 without any real process of formalities around it. Tiny data packets. It's only been upgraded once. They're working on MIDI 2.0 now, but it can more or less comprehensively capture music performance actions, keyboard, guitar, drums, etc. I love MIDI. On every single MIDI port, we get 16 channels. Each channel has 128 notes. A grand piano has 88 keys, so we've got 40 more keys than a grand piano. Each note has 120 increments of velocity, and there's also an additional 128 controller messages for volume, etc., etc. There are more messages as well. But this is sent, when we're sending it over the network, it's sent as a series of individual MIDI events. And this is critical. If we're sending audio, it's a stream. It's a single linear file that's being sent, highly prone and susceptible to any artifacts that the network might put into that. When we're talking about the granular elements of MIDI, a few of them might get disrupted, but generally the rest will be there on time. And the beauty of MIDI is, in this situation, is we're generating the audio upon location, upon arrival. So you're always going to get high quality audio without any of the glitchy artifacts. We can timestamp. There's innumerable routing options. They can be musical commands or operational control commands, and we can quantize on input or output. We also have RTP MIDI, requires port forwarding, which knocks out about 96% of the population. But through UDP, which is the way we send, there's tens of thousands of virtual ports available, and each can be allocated these 16 MIDI channels. So it's a highly operable platform, which is why I love it so much. We have latency accepting solutions. So these are a suite of strategies to minimize the impact of latency. There's a lot of them. We have future start times, so both locations can commence their DAW activity at the same time. We use loops, rhythmic loops, as the foundation point. So I have a rhythmic harmony, hierarchy of beats, bass, harmony, and melody. Melody, it's like a bird. It doesn't need to be locked in, but the rhythm, it does. One bar quantize, so if you do trigger a loop, it starts on the one of the next bar. All the way down to, if you've got a sampler, what is the waveform attack time, 80 milliseconds to bring that bass into propagation, and on it goes. So very quickly, the architecture that we're using, I started with peer-to-peer, full duplex over the internet. So we have two locations, each is running an RTP MIDI platform. It's been native to OS X since 2006. You can also get it for other operating systems. They create virtual MIDI ports, which can be seen by your digital audio software, in this case, Ableton Live. And then there's a periphery of MIDI controllers. So you play the MIDI controller, sends the MIDI into the DAW. The DAW will then route it to the virtual port over the internet and vice versa. Now, from Perth to London, 25,000 kilometre trace route thereabouts. The latency time there's about 150 milliseconds, and at 100 BPM for the musicians, that's 1/16th note, which is about, it's a workable time frame at that tempo. I've also explored virtual remote servers through Amazon. So we've used Singapore to shorten it to its 17,000 kilometre trace route, however, with the same setup. But the latency times there with queuing and whatnot, it's a challenge that I'm deeply looking to resolve at this point in time. I have a vision with all of this, that every human experiences the power of co-creating live music. So every day there's hundreds of thousands of songs being uploaded to streaming platforms, etc. We're oversaturated with pre-recorded music. So I'm on a mission to get more people engaging in real-time co-creation of music. And through that, I'm developing a series of software. One is for the back end, the black box, which is the remote server, setting up a session, NTP sync with people who are joining in that session, and routing the MIDI in a more efficient method. There's a front end for that through a white label, which just has the MIDI routing facility, and it can be applied to different sectors of the industry. Very quickly, there's education, and I'll play it again. As you hit a note, we can visualize what note you're playing when the other person hits a note, so you can get visual and oral feedback of what you're engaging with. Wellness, immersive wellness meditation. You can listen to that with live performers creating the music for you in real time. Of course, music performance, there's gaming, and medical therapeutics. So there's a lot of variety. Music is a ubiquitous art form, as we probably all realize. So I'll play you very quickly just some snippets. This is where it was approximately 3 years ago. That's the MIDI feed on the right-hand side. I'll just pause that. So those in the middle, you might be able to hear a little bit of pan left and right. So that was the early days. The sync wasn't quite set up there. My collaborator in London turned around and said, Matt, I'm also a visual designer. And I'm like, that's great, man. And he said, no, you don't understand. And then he brings in the particle clouds to respond to the notes we're playing by colour, by action. And I'll whip through it, we're at the end. About 8 months ago, we started streaming live to Twitch, so we stepped up the presentation, which led to this. This is where we start getting the note names that we're playing. And that's a guitar sampler by Contact. Okay. And this is probably from about 4 months ago, the latest kind of iteration. And these are all viewable through VR in immersive environments as well. And just finally, a complete plot twist. 12 months ago this week, I came back from Rwanda, Africa, where I had a performance between 2 Canadian pipe organs, snow-covered churches, Vancouver and Calgary, with a collaboration. You can go to the website to have a look. And we had students playing these pipe organs, which are instruments that a lot of them had never heard of before. This is one short snippet. So that's Fabrice in Rwanda, and that was the Calgary organ audio. So thank you very much. That's TELEMIDI.
Great, thanks so much. And as we say, cloud adjacent, but definitely still on the theme of latency. So we do probably have time for one question if there's anyone in the audience. Oh, many questions.
Hey, really cool. How low can you get the latency if you're having maybe 2 musicians in Perth? Have you done that?
I have. The latency still sits at about 60 milliseconds. So it's far more operable, if you will. My whole aim with this is to really push it and challenge it, hence London. And in fact, in Rwanda, I was going through my mobile phone, through the mobile data network. The latency there was about 300 milliseconds or more, which is completely disruptive to music, but we were able to make that happen. Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Thank you.
There you go. Don't rely on the Rwandan mobile network.
It worked.
That's what I'm hearing.
It worked. Fantastic.
Stuff. All right, let's thank Matt.
Thank you all.